Easy English reading. Youth. We sat around a polished table with a bottle and several glasses on it. There was an accountant, a lawyer, Marlowe, and myself. We had all started life in the merchant service, and between the four of us there was the strong bond of the sea and the fellowship of old sailors. Marlowe told us the story of a voyage. Yes, I have seen a little of the eastern seas, but what I remember best is my first voyage there. That's an interesting story. It was my first voyage to the east and my first voyage as second mate. It was also the skipper's first command. He was 60 then, a small man with bored shoulders and one leg shorter than the other. His blue eyes were like those of a boy. When he took me on as second mate, he said, "You know, you will have to work hard on this ship." I said a sailor on any ship has to work. He knew I had been third mate on a big Australian ship. He said to me again, but this is different. And you gentlemen from the big ships, I think you will make it. Come tomorrow." I came the next day and he took me with him. That was 22 years ago. And I was only 20. How time flies. It was one of the happiest days of my life. Second mate for the first time. A really responsible officer. That day I made the acquaintance of the first mate. He looked at me with interest. He was also an old man. He had a Roman nose, a long snow-white beard, and his name was Mon. Both the captain and he were, of course, very good sailors, and between these two old men I felt like a little boy between two grandfathers. The ship was also very old. She was not big, only about 400 tons, and her name was Judea. Below her name on the stern was written in big letters, "Do or Die." I remember liking that inscription. There was real romance in it. And I liked the old ship too. Don't forget my youth. We left London to load coal in a northern port. We were going to Bangkok. Bangkok, I thought. That's wonderful. I had been at sea for 6 years, but I'd only seen Melbourne and Sydney. Very good places. Very interesting places, of course. But Bangkok. We started with a North Sea pilot on board. His name was Jermyn. He did not like me and showed it in many ways. He thought I was too young. He was right, of course. I knew very little about navigation then, but I hated that Jermyn and I still hate him. After a week we were at Yarmouth Roads, and then we got into a gale, a very strong October gale. There was wind, lightning, snow, and a terrible sea. We all had to work very hard. Jermyn, the captain, everyone on board. The gale did not break until the third day. It took us 16 days to get from London to the Tyne. By the time we got there, we had lost our turn to load and had to wait a month. One day Mrs. Beard, the captain's name was Beard, came from Colchester to see her old man. Mrs. Beard was an old woman with a wrinkled face and the figure of a young girl. She asked me to bring her my shirts to mend. This was different from the captain's wives I had known before. When I brought my shirts, she said, "And your socks?" "John's, Captain Beard's. Things are all right now. I should be glad to have something to do." And she mended all my things. That kind little old woman. At last, our ship was loaded and ready to start on her voyage. At 9 o'clock in the morning, they told us we could start the next day. That evening, Mrs. Beard had to take a late train home. The morning and afternoon were very long, but after tea, I went on deck for a smoke. It was very dark. Suddenly, I saw a red light near us. A second later, I saw a big steamer coming fast towards us. I called down to the cabin, "Come up quickly!" Then I heard a frightened voice far away in the dark. "Stop her quickly!" I heard the sound of a bell. A distant voice shouted, "We're going right into that ship!" The next thing I heard was a terrible crash. the steamer had run into us. There was a moment of confusion, screaming and running. Then somebody said, "All clear, sir." "Are you all right?" a voice asked. I shouted back, "I think so." "What kind of steamer is that?" shouted Mon. By then we could only see the large silhouette of a steamer maneuvering in the distance. They shouted some name, a woman's name, I think. Miranda or Melissa or something like that. And then the silhouette of the ship was lost in the dark. Mon said to me, "Let's go and see what damage this steamer has done." It was too much, but we stayed in the dock for 3 weeks. At the end of that time, on the evening before the day appointed for our departure, I accompanied Mrs. Beard to the station. She said to me, "You are a good young man. You are so attentive to John, to Captain Beard, I mean. If you see him at night without his muffler, remind him to put it on, and take a little general care of him, young man, will you?" When the train started, I took my cap off for the old woman. I never saw her again. The next day, we sailed. We thought nothing could stop us now. We had been away from London for 3 months. It was January, but the weather was fine. The good weather lasted all through the North Sea, all through the Channel, and until we were about 300 miles west of the Lizard. Then the wind started to blow. At first we were glad because it blew in the direction we wanted, but it grew stronger, and in 2 days it blew a gale. It blew without interruption, without rest. Day after day, night after night, we could hear nothing but the wind and the sound of the water pouring over the deck. There was no rest for the ship and no rest for the crew. One night, Mon spoke to me through the small window of my cabin above my bunk. I was lying there in my boots, sleepless, though I had not slept for many nights. He said, "Come up, Marlowe. The ship is leaking and we have to start pumping. It is child's play." They were already pumping when I got on deck. We pumped all night, all the next day, all the week, watch after watch. Still, the ship was leaking badly. There was not a dry spot on her. The weather did not change. I will always remember those days. For us, there was no sky, no sun, no moon, nothing but an angry wind and an angry sea. We pumped watch after watch for dear life. We forgot the day of the week, the name of the month, even the year. The storm grew stronger and the waves poured over the poor old ship. We tied ourselves to the mast and kept pumping without stopping. We forgot what it felt like to be dry, but all the time somewhere in me was the thought, this is a real adventure, something you read about. This is my first voyage as second mate and I am only 20. Here I am working as well as any of these men. I was happy. I had moments of real jubilation. Then I remembered the words written on the stern of the ship, "Judea, London, do or die." Oh, youth, the strength of it, the imagination of it. For me, the Judea was not an old ship loaded with coal, but the test of life. I still think of her with affection, as of someone dead whom I once loved. I will never forget her. One night as we were pumping, tied to the mast, a terrible wave crashed aboard and water poured all over us. We had seen many big waves, but this was perhaps the biggest of all. "Hang on, boys!" I shouted. Then a Niagara of water came over us. Then something hard caught my leg. I picked it up. It was a saucepan. At first I did not understand what was in my hand, but suddenly I understood everything and shouted, "Boys, the cook's deck house is gone. Let's look for the cook." There was a deck house forward where the cook slept. With great difficulty we went looking for him. The house had gone overboard, but we found the cook, Abraham. He was where the kitchen had been, laughing and talking to himself. He had gone mad, completely mad from the sudden shock. We took him downstairs and went back to the pumps. This business could not wait a minute. The next day the sky cleared, but as the sea went down, the leak became worse than ever. The crew wanted to get back to England, and there was really nothing else to do. It was clear that the ship had to be repaired. We headed home, hoping to reach Falmouth. The wind was against us, and we spent a lot of time pumping, but we finally reached Falmouth Harbor. Here, the necessary repairs were made, the coal was reloaded, a new crew came on board, and we started again, for Bangkok. By the end of the week, we were back in the port of Falmouth again. The crew said they were not going to Bangkok in a ship that needed pumping 8 hours out of 24. New repairs were made. In a few days, they said the repairs were done. The owner came on board and said he had never seen a better ship, but the truth was she was no good. She was too old to go to sea. We all saw that. Poor old Captain Beard was almost sick with all the trouble. Remember, he was 60, and this was his first command. Mon said it was a bad business and would end badly, but I only wanted to go to Bangkok. To Bangkok! Magic name! I was 20, and this was my first second mate's voyage, and the East was waiting for me. We sailed with a new crew, the third, but the ship was leaking worse than ever. This time, we did not even go out of the harbor. As soon as we set sail, the crew saw the state of the ship and simply refused to work. Again, we came to Falmouth, and this time we stayed there for a very long time. There were only 3 of us on board. The poor old Captain Mon, who did the cooking, and I. We soon became the laughingstock of the Falmouth shopkeepers. When they saw us, they said, "These people are from the ship that has started 3 times for Bangkok." They asked us in a familiar way, "Do you think you will ever get to Bangkok?" It was terrible. Morally, it was worse than pumping for life. I got 3 months' pay and 5 days' leave and went to London. It took me a day to get there and another day to get back, but 3 months' pay was gone anyway. I don't know what I did with the money. I went to a music hall. I had lunch, dinner, and supper in a good restaurant in Regent Street, and came back in time with nothing but a few books and a new raincoat. The new repairs were finally finished. By now, the ship's story was known across the channel, and the owner could not get the crew. Finally, he sent one from Liverpool, and we sailed again for Bangkok. As before, the weather was fine, and the old Judea moved slowly. Her speed was about 3 miles an hour. She was tired, the old ship, but on she went. So, with fair winds and good weather, we finally entered the Indian Ocean. Here the wind was light. The ship moved very, very slowly. Weeks went by. We had a little fresh water, and the captain told me to watch it and use it very sparingly. One Saturday evening, the men asked me to give them an extra bucket of water for washing. I went down to get it from the water tank. The smell down there was very strange. It was like petrol. I was glad to get out. I went to the midship ventilator and opened the lid. The air was hot and had a strong smell. I put the lid down. It was clear. The coal was on fire. I went straight to the captain and told him, but what could he do? The next day, the smoke came out. It had been raining all the time when we loaded the coal in Falmouth, and now, with the long passage, the coal had been heated. The result was combustion. The captain called us into his cabin. He had a chart on the table in front of him, and he looked very unhappy. He said, "The West Australian coast is not far, but we have to fight the fire. First, we will try to stop it by shutting out the air." We tried. We closed everything, and it still smoked. It was clear that if there was smoke on the way out, there was air on the way in. We started pumping seawater into the ship, but the result was that steam went up with the smoke. It was our destiny to pump water into the ship and to pump it out of the ship. And that whole time she was slowly moving forward in beautiful weather. The sky was blue, the sea calm. All the time, of course, we saw no fire. It was somewhere below, but we fought that invisible fire as hard as we could. We tried everything. We even tried digging down to the fire, but no one could stay down for more than a minute. Nothing helped. The smoke kept coming out. Things were starting to look bad. We had 3 boats on our ship, and we lowered them into the sea. Then suddenly the smoke reduced. We pumped very hard. In 2 days there was no smoke at all. That was on Friday. On Saturday nothing was done. The crew washed their clothes and their faces. We were all very happy, but the smell of something burning remained on the ship. Captain Beard and Mon went from one ventilator to another, but I thought the fire was out and felt very happy. The night was fine. We slept well, for the first time in many nights. In the morning, a ship passed us, the first we had seen for months. We were approaching land at last. Java Head was only about 190 miles away. The next day, I was on watch from 8 to 12. At breakfast, the captain said, "It's strange how the smell stays in the ship." At about 10, I went down to the main deck for a moment. A young sailor standing near me said, "I think we did well, didn't we?" Then suddenly I felt a terrible jolt and found myself in the air. My body described a half circle, but small as it was, I had time to think. In the air I thought, what is this? An accident? An underwater volcano? An explosion? Then I fell back down to the deck. It was clear. There had been an explosion. I saw that the main deck was gone. I tried to get up and see what was left of the other parts of the ship. I managed, but with difficulty, because my head was spinning. And then I saw Mon, his eyes round like saucers, his mouth wide open and his long white hair standing straight up on his head. I looked at him, and he looked at me. I did not know then that I had no hair, or that my face was black, my nose cut and my chin bleeding. I had lost my cap and my shirt was torn. I did not know all this at the time. I was just happy to be alive. I went with Mon to find out about the crew. No one was killed, but everyone was more or less injured. The ship was still moving slowly, its masts sticking out like 2 big black trees. The sky was still blue and the sea very calm. I remember that the first thing that surprised me was the peacefulness of the sea and the sky. Then I saw the captain. The old man looked very calm. He took the wheel himself. "Set the sails," he ordered. The crew worked hard to get the ship back on course. Smoke came out. Now what? We asked ourselves. Suddenly we saw a steamer on the horizon. Captain Beard said, "She can help us." We signaled to her. Our flag said in the international language of the sea, "Our ship is on fire. We want help." The steamer approached and signaled a reply, "I am coming to help you." In half an hour she was close to us. We shouted, "We've been blown up." "Yes, all right, was the reply. One of the boats of the steamer went down into the water and came towards us. In a quarter of an hour, a small, slender man came aboard our ship. He was the first mate. He looked around and cried, "Oh, boys, you will have to leave her." We were silent. For a while he talked to our captain. Then they both went on board the steamer. When he came back, our captain told us that the steamer was the Somerville, from Western Australia, bound for Singapore with mail, and that the captain, whose name was Nash, would tow us to Anger or Batavia, where we could put out the fire. From there we could continue our journey to Bangkok. "We'll make it," said the captain. Nobody said a word. At noon the steamer began to tow. The Judea followed at the end of a long tow line like a cloud of smoke. At 10 that night, we saw the fire for the first time. The speed of the tow had probably caused it. I saw it and told Mon. "Then the game is up," he said. "We've got to stop this towing or we won't have time to get out." We started shouting and ringing bells to get the steamer's attention, but she kept on towing. Then we cut the tow rope. Of course, they soon found out on the steamer that the rope had been cut. The Somerville made a circle and came very close to our ship. We were all on deck watching her. Captain Beard was standing in front of us. Captain Nash shouted, "Come along, I will take you to Java." "Thank you." "No," said our captain. "We must see the last of our ship." "I can't wait any longer," cried Captain Nash. "Mail on board, you know." Aye, we are all right, sir. The sea is quite calm." "Very well, goodbye." The steamer pulled away and was soon lost in the distance, and we remained on our burning ship. And then I knew that, as commander of a small boat, I should first see the east. I thought it was a good idea. We should see the last of the old ship. That was fine too. Oh, youth. The old man told us to take whatever valuable things we could save from the ship and put them in the boats. We did so. Then all the boats were put out to sea, and I was ordered to get into one and keep them all ready, close to the ship. I had 2 sailors with me. The 3 of us tied boats together and did what we could to keep us not too far from the ship and not too close to it. By now there was a big circle on the sea, lit by the fire from the burning ship. It was very dangerous to keep the boats close to the ship. The masts could fall at any moment and no one could tell in which direction they would fall. I could not see anyone on board. I did not understand why they were still on the ship. What were they doing there? I finally shouted, "On deck there!" A sailor looked out. "We're ready for you here," I said. The man went away and came back very soon. The captain says, "All right, sir, just keep the boats away from the ship." Half an hour passed. Suddenly, with a terrible noise, the foremast fell. I shouted again, "On deck there!" At first, there was no reply. Then a man informed me, "Coming right away, sir," and left. For a long time, I heard nothing but the roar of the fire. Then I decided to go aboard the ship myself. It was bright as day and very hot. Captain Beard was lying on the deck with one arm under his head. He was sleeping. And do you know what the rest of the men were doing? They were sitting around a box, eating bread and cheese and drinking porter. Each man had a bottle between his knees and some bread and cheese in his hand. Mon stood up. "The last meal on board," he explained. "We haven't eaten all day and we can't take all the food with us." Then, looking at the sleeping captain, he added, "The old man has not slept for many days, and there will probably be little sleep for him in the boats." "There will be no boats if you stay here much longer," I said angrily. I walked over to the captain and shook him by the shoulder. He finally opened his eyes, but did not move. "Time to leave her, sir," I said quietly. He stood up and looked at the fire. "Youngest first," he said. The youngest sailors went overboard. The others followed. Eventually, all but the captain were gone. The old man stayed on board alone for a while. Then I went back on board and took him away. I was just in time. Finally, the 3 boats, still tied together, slowly moved away from the ship. It was only 16 hours after the explosion. The captain was in the longboat, Mon was in the second, and I was in the third, the smallest of the 3. So I got my first command of this little boat. There were 2 sailors with me. I had some provisions, biscuits, salt meat, and water. The captain ordered me to stay close to the longboat. We did not leave at once. The captain wanted the boats to wait until the burning ship went down. All night the boats drifted around the ship, waiting for it to go down. The tongues of fire coming out of her grew longer and longer. Finally, a high, clear flame rose into the sky and the ship began to burn fiercely. Then the second mast fell, and in the morning she was nothing but a mass of black, charred wood. Then we began to row to land. Around midday, all the boats came together for the last time. We all looked at the captain's chart to see where we were going. The nearest land was Java, and even that was a long way off. But after a meal of bread and water, we were given our final instructions. "Steer north and stay together. Be careful with your boat," said Mon, "or you will be steering it underwater." The next day, I sat steering my small boat, my first command, with nothing but water and sky around me. The other two boats were far behind. I steered for Java as the captain had told me. Another interesting name, like Bangkok, you know. So I steered for many days. You know how hard it is to steer a small boat. I remember nights and days of calm, when the boat seemed to stand still despite all our rowing. I remember the heat, the rain, the storm, and that is how I see the East. I have seen it many times since, but when I think of it now, I always see it as I first saw it from that little boat, and I have the feeling of an oar in my hand. I see a bay, a wide bay, smooth as glass, shimmering in the moonlight. A red light burns in the distance, and the night is soft and warm. Suddenly, a light breeze came out of the still night, full of strange aromatic smells. No, I can never forget this. We steered towards the red light in the bay. We passed two big ships and finally ran the nose of the boat against the end of a quay. We were very tired. My men dropped their oars and fell asleep immediately, but I sat there looking at the dark, mysterious shore. There was no light, no sound. Suddenly I heard the splash of oars. A boat was coming. I shouted, "Judea, ahoy!" A faint cry was answered. It was the captain. I had beaten his boat by 3 hours and was glad to hear the old man's voice again. "Is that you, Marlowe?" he said. "Yes, sir," I shouted. His boat came close to mine. The captain was sitting at the stern. The men in the boat looked terribly tired. "We've had a bad time," he said. "Mon is behind us, not very far." I looked around as we spoke and saw a bright, moving light far out at sea. "There's a steamer passing the bay," I said, but when I looked more closely I saw that she was not passing but entering the bay. In a short time she weighed anchor. The captain sent me to the steamer to find out if she was English and if they could give us a passage somewhere. With difficulty I woke my men and steered for the steamer. I soon came up to her. "What steamer is this?" I shouted. "Eh? What is this? And who are you?" replied a man from the bridge in English. "The crew of an English ship, burnt at sea. We came here tonight. I am the second mate. The captain is in the longboat and wants to know if you can give us passage somewhere." "Oh my goodness, this is the Celestial from Singapore. Of course we'll take you. I'll arrange everything with your captain in the morning," came the reply. We went back to the end of the quay, and I finally went to sleep. When I opened my eyes, it was daytime. I lay there for a while without moving, my eyes wide open, and then I saw the men from the east looking at me. I saw brown, bronze, yellow faces with black eyes. They were looking silently at the boats, at the sleeping men who had come to them from the sea that night. I sat up. I can still see it. The wide bay, the sea, blue like the sea of a dream, the bright sun in the sky, the attentive faces and the tired sailors sleeping in the boats. I tell you, I have seen the East since, but I shall always remember it as I saw it that first moment when I opened my young eyes to it after that struggle with the sea and the fire." Marlowe paused. "Ah, the good old days," he went on. "Youth and the sea, the good, strong sea, the salty, bitter sea that whispers and roars at you." He drank again. "Tell me, was that not the best time? The time when we were young at sea? Young, with nothing but our strength and our youth?" And we all nodded at him, the accountant, the lawyer, and I. We all nodded at him across the polished table that reflected our wrinkled faces like brown water.